Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity for the Nintendo Switch. Now, most of you that have watched my video reviews for quite a long time know that I am a diehard fan of the Hyrule Warriors series and Warriors games in general. I've, at one point or another, owned all three versions of Hyrule Warriors, beat all of them, and even reviewed the definitive edition twice because I wanted to have video footage the second time. Then I also reviewed the 3DS version of Fire Emblem Warriors, and now this. So, if there's someone who's qualified to talk about a Nintendo Warriors series, it's definitely me. And I still haven't played a regular Dynasty Warriors game, with all that being said. So, Hyrule Warriors was more or less a Zelda fanfiction, where all of these different worlds crossed together to allow for characters from the various Zelda universes to come together in a somewhat cohesive manner. However, in Age of Calamity, this is entirely focused on the Breath of the Wild universe, or more specifically, the events of the Calamity that occurred 100 years prior to the events of the main story. So, if you were expecting, say, characters from Zelda games that came after Hyrule Warriors, like, say, Triforce Heroes, you're going to be out of luck, as this is 100% Breath of the Wild influence. The UI, the animations, everything is going to be from Nintendo's last amazing Wii U game. However, with the power of the Switch, it allows for the animations to be faster, more powerful, more frantic, and overall it feels like Breath of the Wild on steroids, which is a great thing. Now, most people who play Hyrule Warriors games don't get it for the story, they get it for the gameplay. And while I don't want to say the story is bad, it also doesn't deliver a whole lot of shocks and amazing twists that the Zelda series is particularly known for, though I will say that it's leagues better than what Hyrule Warriors had to offer. And I definitely think that this is a great step in the right direction for not only the Breath of the Wild franchise, but Warriors and Zelda games in the future, as I definitely like the overall concept and execution here. The stakes felt really high, the music was incredible, and they did a great job of replicating the best parts of my current favorite video game. Now, if you're thinking this is just going to be a Hyrule Warriors clone with Breath of the Wild graphics, think again. I had to readjust several of the mechanics that I became muscle memory accustomed to in the first game, and had to get used to almost an entirely new game. Granted, you're still controlling between 1 to 4 allies, taking on legions, we're talking hundreds to thousands of enemies at a time, but the mechanics themselves have been changed to not only refine the formula, but also to incorporate Breath of the Wild aspects into it. So rather than having heart drops in the grass like you would in Hyrule Warriors, now you have apple drops, and the apples will save in your inventory, and you'll have to eat them to restore your health, just as you would in Breath of the Wild. Cooking also takes place, where if you have the right ingredients from all the side quests and defeating monsters, you could eat some food before the battle to give your character an attack buff. And this is a great way to still have that experimentation that Breath of the Wild fans really loved. Even if the characters were already in Hyrule Warriors, as is the case with Link, Zelda, and Impa, they play almost entirely different from their previous iteration because these are based on how they were in Breath of the Wild. So Impa is going to be, of course, a younger version of her that focuses more on being a Sheikah than just trying to imitate Japanese ninja arts. Zelda is also going to be over-relying on the Sheikah slate rather than her magical princess abilities, and Link is going to be more or less the acrobatic knight protecting the princess, as opposed to just pulling out every item in Zelda history. Now, what really shines about Age of Calamity is, for the most part, its presentation and its preservation of what makes Breath of the Wild great. The graphic style is almost pixel for pixel identical to how you remember it. Even the world map, where you choose your quests and side quests, is ripped straight from the original game. The graphics are just about identical, the textures are just as great as they used to be, and even though it's not as realistic as the original Hyrule Warriors, at the same time somehow the animations feel even more impressive, especially considering that a lot of the techniques that Link could already perform are performed here, but in a warrior setting. Did you love perfect dodging? Well, that's here too, and now Link's Flurry Rush is even faster. Did you love all of the runes like Magnesis, Cryonis, and Remote Bombs? They're all here too, but now all of the characters can use them, so that leads to unique animations depending on who's triggering the rune. Each enemy also has specific strengths and weaknesses, so that if you see the corresponding rune icon appear above their head, you can get in a counterattack that makes the enemy even weaker. You also get elemental rods by defeating Wizrobes, and while rods have been in the Zelda series for eons, they've always had a struggle with making players want to use them without expending resources. So how is Age of Calamity going to fix this, when so many solutions have been presented in other Zelda games? Simple. Make each rod have its own mini magic meter and refill it by facing other Wizrobes. You know, that's kind of a theme of this entire game to begin with, is kind of a risk-reward factor. While Flurry Rushes are satisfying to pull off, and they allow you to do some major damage on the enemy, they're also tricky to pull off, as the timing is, as it was in Breath of the Wild, extremely strict unless you do a recipe ahead of time to offset it. So it makes it so that you want to get closer to the enemies, but at the same time, if they do hit you, especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties, they'll really hit you. The music is also fantastic in this game. Almost every track is either orchestral or live performed, which you know is going to be a big deal for me, but for the rest of you, for those of you that felt burned out on Hyrule Warriors' music, where you thought, oh no, they took classic Zelda tunes and made them rockish, this game takes classic Breath of the Wild tunes that were mostly either forgettable or ambient, and it turns it into a grand sweeping score that wouldn't be too out of place in, say, a Lord of the Rings or Star Wars movie. I love how many little motifs were snuck into each song, and even the new pieces still feel grand and majestic and fit the scope of a huge war against a world-shattering calamity. It also really helps that, just like the Hyrule Warriors games before, there's an in-game soundtrack, although it is slightly disappointing that, as of right now, you still can't choose which songs play for which mission like you could in the original game. That being said, there's not really too many bad songs at all in this game, with the exception of maybe the one or two pieces that involve some electronics, but you'll understand why they're there once you actually get there. This doesn't really do any disservices to the Breath of the Wild universe either. Like, anything that didn't work, like weapon durability, is completely gone, and everything that works has either been perfected or it's been preserved to exactly the way you like it. Now, if you're going into this for the story, I really don't want to say too much, because I think Nintendo over-promoted the story in this game. But the gist of it is that you are playing 100 years before the events of the main game, and it's hinted that there could be an alternate outcome to the Calamity, as evidenced by the very first cutscene of the game, showing a guardian coming from the future warning Zelda and her companions that a calamity is about to take place, and Zelda is determined to prevent that by any means possible. I really don't want to say any more, but it does provide a lot of context to things in Breath of the Wild that were kind of just there. And it's also really nice to be able to actually play through events that you were only told about. It's kind of the difference between me telling you guys about all the conferences I've chaperoned versus actually going to one of the conferences. Hearing about something is cool, but actually experiencing it is amazing. And I'm really glad that the team at Koei Tecmo had such reverence for the Zelda series that this feels like something Nintendo had made, yet Nintendo was primarily there as a supervisor rather than actually making the game. So whatever magic they had to use to get the engine running as good as it did was just incredible. The game still has voice acting, and pretty much every actor from Breath of the Wild reprises their role, with the weird exception of Daruk. For some odd reason, he sounds kind of bizarre this time around, although at least he still has that gruff, hey buddy, everything's cool vibe that the original actor delivered in his lines. Now, one area where you might be a little bit disappointed in Age of Calamity is in the frame rate department. Now, let me reiterate, I am not an expert on overanalyzing 60 versus 30 FPS or anything like that. And I was actually one of the few YouTubers that didn't point out the frame dips in the original Breath of the Wild. However, in this game, where there are hundreds of enemies coming at you at a time, it is very noticeable, especially when you get to the later parts of the game where the game just chugs as slow as Super Mario Maker on Nintendo Switch Online. And overall, I feel like it's nice that the Switch can have way more enemies on screen than the Wii U and 3DS could ever handle, but the turnoff is that on levels where you're surrounded by enemies, they don't feel as impactful as they should because the Switch is struggling to keep up with all of the action. However, when it actually does run, it runs really well, and the animations almost never get tiring to watch, as all of the characters feel distinct and powerful, and even characters that you would think, oh man, that character's gonna stink, actually are pretty darn good. There's not really an unlikable character in the whole bunch. Another really cool change that baffled me about Age of Calamity that makes me surprised that Warriors games haven't done this before is that each character not only feels more unique because each of their movesets are so vastly different from the other, but they also each have a unique special ability that can be triggered by pressing the ZR button. That's my compromise for how Canadians and Americans pronounce the last letter of the alphabet differently. I hope you like it. Anyway, you press that button, and each character will trigger a unique moveset. Whereas Link, for example, will shoot a bunch of arrows in slow motion, Zelda will activate every Sheikah rune, and Impa will absorb the symbols. I still don't know what the heck that means. Not only that, but this leads into the already existing standard Hyrule Warriors strong attack, weak attack mentality that overall diversifies the character roster even more, so it feels like even characters that theoretically are similar to another still feel completely different. And whatever wizardry the team had to do to get that working, I really, really applaud them for it. Now, if you were a fan of how Hyrule Warriors had the adventure mode to keep you coming for more and more content, where Gerard is still trying to complete the game all these years later, you're gonna find that this new approach is both a blessing and a curse to how it used to be. There's still a lot of content here on offer. However, there's less side quests and more of just quests in general. Also, rather than having a definitive event mode or adventure map, you're instead going to have everything taking place on Hyrule's map. So if, for example, a villager needs some fish, rather than going on an entire quest just to get them fish, you'll just grab the fish that you got from the enemies and just hand it to them, and they'll say, thanks, here's something for your trouble. There are still, of course, those optional quests that you can do that will give you perks. Those are still here, but they're on the same menu as you would with both the fetch quests and also the main quests. So if you're looking for an entire optional mode to conquer, it's more so the entire game is a mode that you can conquer. And if you do these side quests, you will be extremely overpowered in the upcoming battles. So much so that with the exception of the very last battle, I felt like I was at least 10 or 12 levels too high for what the game recommended. So if you go out of your way to actually do stuff, you're going to find that this game not only gives you a lot of content, but gives you good rewards for it, including new combos, more hearts for the characters, and overall it's a huge step up from the really tedious skill tree system that Hyrule Warriors had. Overall, I think Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is one of the best games Nintendo has made this year. Well, actually, I don't think Nintendo made it at all, so that's kind of sad. But overall, this is definitely a humongous improvement over not only the original Hyrule Warriors, but a great way of finally letting us play out scenarios that we've only dreamed about or heard in flashbacks. The graphics and music are absolutely stellar, and while the frame rate occasionally hiccups, and there's not as much thrill of exploration as there was in Breath of the Wild with a lot of invisible walls getting in the way, the story still feels high stakes and intense. The music is amazing, the characters all feel great, some of the hidden unlockables and secrets near the end actually made me giggle in like, whoa, dang, that's a cool twist. And besides the slowdown, there's not really huge problems in the gameplay department. So since this game came out in 2020, just in time for Nintendo to actually have a holiday release besides their demake of Shadow Dragon, I am confident in giving this game a 19.5 out of 20. I really wanted to give it a perfect score, but I don't think a lot of people will be able to tolerate the major slowdowns in the last couple of areas, and I also don't think that they'll be particularly happy with the repetitive gameplay and the extreme lack of enemy variety. Now, if it were me personally, yes, it would totally be a 20 out of 20. But if you aren't a fan of Warriors games to begin with and you just want this for the story, it might not be worth slogging through even easy mode to get to that, because there's still going to be a lot of side quests that you need to do to raise your level enough to be confident. But there are 4 different difficulty settings, and the game does start out very easily, so you can plow through most of the story, but don't go into it if you're looking for a narrative. Go into it if you're looking for the amazing gameplay that Nintendo Warriors games have always provided. Not to say the story is bad, but it definitely shouldn't be your priority if you're gonna buy this. Maybe rent it. That being said, I do like this significantly better than the other Warriors games, so if you thought that those games had bad mechanics and more of a proof of concept, this feels a lot more fleshed out and thought out. So with that, thank you very much for watching. If I left anything out and you still have questions, concerns, critiques, please let me know in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and can we get some Hyrule Warriors representation in Super Smash Bros.? Don't tell me you wouldn't be excited to see, say, Lana in Smash Bros. With some of this amazing music. Bye!